Flame Leviathan is the first boss you're going to come across when you get into Ulduar. It's got a short gauntlet that you're going to do in vehicles, and then you've got the boss himself. The 3 vehicles are salvage siege engines, salvage demolishers, and salvage choppers. We'll get into all of what these vehicles do and your personal responsibilities if you're either the driver or a passenger in one of these vehicles. But first you need to understand the difference between normal mode and hard mode. During the gauntlet on the way to the boss, there's 4 towers. You've got the Tower of Life, which is Freya's tower. You've got the Tower of Flames, which is Mimiron's tower. You've got the Tower of Frost, which is Hodyr's tower, and the Tower of Storms, which is Thorim's tower. These are the 4 keepers that you're going to encounter further in during the raid. For each one of these you leave up during the fight, you'll get additional rewards, from an extra emblem for each tower left up to extra runed orbs and bonus patterns. If you leave all 4 towers up, this is the hardest of hard mode, and then you'll get an additional item which will be a hard mode item. You cannot get hard mode items from 1, 2 or 3 towers. Has to be 4. Just before we get any further, if you want a full written guide of this, you can find it on Warcraft Tavern. I'll put a link in the description below. Now, when you first enter Ulduar, you can either speak to this guy, which is Lorekeeper of Norgannon. This will activate the 4 defense towers. So if you plan to do the boss with either 1, 2, 3, or all 4 towers alive, this is the guy you need to speak to start it. If you go down towards the start of the gauntlet, you'll find Bran Bronzebeard. If you speak to him, it will start it with all towers off from the word go. So this means just completely easy mode with 0 towers, and you can just race straight through the middle, killing all of the pylons along the way, nuking all the ads, and just get straight on with the boss. Now, I personally wouldn't recommend doing this. I would speak to Lorekeeper of Norgannon and keep a minimum of 1 tower up. Really, you should be doing it with 2. And this is purely so it gets you used to 4 towers by having to do shutdowns. Now, there's 2 ways of approaching the boss. You do it with shutdowns or without shutdowns. A shutdown is when you shoot people up on top of the boss, kill the turrets, and then he takes 50% damage and it resets his speed buff. Doing it with no shutdown is absolutely viable with 0 towers up, and it is literally just by firing Pyrite at the boss. Because he dies that quick, it doesn't matter. Now, if you're going to do this with 4 towers up with no shutdown at all, the eye level of your group is going to have to be extremely high, and it's probably not until you've got Ulduar on farm completely, all hard modes, where the eye level of your raid is going to be high enough to ignore shutdowns completely and still do 4 towers. All of the abilities we're about to discuss are exactly the same on 10 and 25 man. So for the driver of the siege engine, you're going to get Ram, which just rams enemies in front of the vehicle. You're going to get Electroshock, which is an interrupt. There's only one ability that you're really going to be using this on, and we'll get to that when we talk about the boss. You're also going to get Steam Rush, which overdrives the vehicle, granting a short duration speed boost. It also damages and knocks back any enemies your vehicle collides with. Now, all of these abilities require Steam Pressure. Steam Pressure just regenerates over time. For a gunner, you just get Fire Cannon, which is just a direct impact of massive damage. Anti-Air Rocket, which fires missiles that explode on impact with airborne targets. And Shield Generator, which activates the vehicle's shields, absorbing physical, fire, frost, and arcane damage for 5 seconds on a 1-minute cooldown. The Salvage Demolisher gets Hurl Boulder, which is basically just a filler spell. We don't need to talk about that too much at the moment. You get Hurl Pyrite Barrel, which is a big old blast that stacks up to 10 times. Spoiler, this is the thing you need to keep on the boss as close to 100% of the time, because it's what's going to actually kill him. You get Ram, which just rams enemies in front of the vehicle. And you get Throw Passenger, which this is used to do the shutdown, so you just launch your passenger at your crosshair, also known as the boss. The gunner gets a mortar, which is just an explosive blast that you fire. It gets anti-air rockets again to shoot down things in the sky, which is going to be pyrite barrels, which we'll talk about in a minute. You get grab crate, which is to hook pyrite to you, which is your primary resource of dealing damage or using speed boosts. Which a good time to mention speed boost, because you get increased speed, which infuses your engine with liquid pyrite, giving 100% movement speed for 20 seconds. This does cost 25 pyrite though, and we'll get onto how you need to manage that shortly. And finally, you get load into catapult, which this is how you, as the passenger of the Demolisher, will put yourself in the catapult, and then the driver will launch you. The Salvage Chopper gets Sonic Horn, which is just to honk the horn, sending a sonic blast in a 35-yard cone in front of the chopper. It costs energy, and your energy just regens over time, as you would expect. You also get Tar, where you can drop a pool of tar underneath you, which lasts 45 seconds, and it slows enemies. It can also be ignited with fire damage. You get Speed Boost, which is just hitting the gas, increasing your movement speed by 100% for 5 seconds. And finally, you get First Aid Kit. So if you've got a passenger in your bike, you can heal them to full health over 4 seconds. It's got a minute cooldown, but trust me, you won't need it any more than once a minute. Now, the main things that you need to worry about from the boss is Pursue. So every 30 seconds, Flame Leviathan will pick a random siege engine or demolisher and it will chase them around. That's one ability. Flame Vents is the other one. So Flame Vents deals fire damage every 10 seconds to all enemies within 50 yards of the boss, and this can be interrupted. Honestly, outside of those two and Gathering Speed, where Flame Leviathan periodically gains a static buff granting 5% movement speed, which stacks 20 times, none of the other abilities matter. There's only a couple of others, but it's like a battering ram in melee, which you don't want to be getting hit by it, full stop, and then missile strikes that you just can't do anything about anyway. Now, if you think about all of these abilities, they're countered by one of the vehicles. So as the driver of a siege engine, you'll be expected to use electroshock on the boss when it does flame vents, and you want to cast it quick because everybody's going to be taking damage. When he's gaining speed, you're going to want your salvage chopper to be putting tar down in front of the boss, and preferably having someone in a siege engine or a demolisher light it up so the boss also takes extra damage while he's getting slowed. And the Fixate ability, where he targets a siege engine or a demolisher, both of these vehicles have a way of increasing speed. So for the demolisher, the passenger can give the speed boost, and for the siege engine, you can use Steam Rush, and also your gunner or your passenger can use Shield Generator to stop you taking damage anyway. I want to cover both 10 and 25 man, even if this video ends up a little bit long, but it will be comprehensive at least. So for 10 man, you're going to get 2 of each vehicle. So you get 2 people in 2 siege engines, which is 4 people, and then you get 2 people in 2 demolishers, which is another 4 people. And now there's 2 choppers left, and you'd think 1 chopper for each person. Wrong. You only want to use one of these choppers. You'll take both choppers down to where you're actually going to start the boss, but then you're going to ditch one. Because even if it's week 1, you should definitely leave a tower or 2 up, purely so you can practice the shutdown. Doing a shutdown on the normal difficulty with no towers up is just absolutely pointless and probably a waste of time. Because when you keep your pyrite stacked from your 2 demolishers, it will die so fast it doesn't even matter. So what you're actually going to do is use 2 demolishers, 2 siege engines, and 1 chopper. And for 25 man, you're going to want to use 5 demolishers, 4 siege engines, and 4 choppers. This is because you're going to have 3 people loaded into your demolishers before you even start the boss. And for 10 man, you're going to have 1 person loaded into a demolisher before you start a boss. So while you may think your vehicle only carries 2 people, the demolishers can carry 3. Word of warning though, when you've got a player loaded in, as the driver you can't hurl pyrite, there's certain abilities that will be restricted, so you need to get that person fired up quickly, literally as soon as the fight starts. So if we cover the shutdown rotation first, so for 10 man, what you're going to want to do is as soon as you pull the boss, you're going to want the person that's loaded into the demolisher, which needs to be a ranged DPS by the way. You don't want to send melee up because it limits the amount of turrets they can actually hit, and they'll end up having to drop back down without even causing a shutdown. So you always want ranged DPS, and the preference to this should be Boomkins and Shadow Priests, or even Elemental Shaman. You want something that can go up there, it can do fairly big damage, preferably a bit of multi-dotting, but the important thing is being able to do a bit of self-healing. So as I say, when you pull, you're going to want to instantly fire the person up that's in your demolisher, or if you're on 25 man, the 3 people that are loaded into demolishers. Now what the demolishers need to do for the entire fight, whether it's normal, 1 tower, 2 tower, 3 tower, 4 tower, it doesn't matter. You're going to want your gunner or your passenger firing down pyrite in the sky and then hooking it into the demolisher anytime you're under 50 pyrite. For the driver, you're going to want to be keeping pyrite on the boss but not starving yourself. So the number 2 ability is to launch pyrite. You don't want to just spam it because then you're going to run out of pyrite on the floor. The important thing here is to maintain the dot. So you only need to press it every 4 or 5 seconds. The rest of the time should be spamming 1. You can either spam 1 on ads, or you can spam 1 on the boss. Ads should be the preference, especially if they're on you already or they're close to you. You might as well nuke them down. But never let your pyrite drop, and remember, you are one of those vehicles that can be fixated from the boss, so always be ready to get increased speed from your passenger and kite away. When you're kiting, it's important if you can keep your bikes maintaining tar down under the boss to keep it slowed, or you're getting your shutdowns happening regularly so he's not got a big speed boost, you absolutely can still 180 pyrite, 180, keep running again. Kiting, but every now and again turning around just to refresh your stack. Now you want to rinse and repeat. So if you're on 10 man, a shutdown's just occurred, the bike should go and pick up the person that was doing the shutdown on top of the boss and get them picked up ASAP and taken back to their demolisher. At which point, the passenger in the demolisher at the moment should load himself up, again, ideally a multi-dot class or a ranged DPS with some self-healing. And now, once the shutdown is finished, you're going to hurl him up. And now the person that done the first shutdown is your passenger. He's now the one that's getting you your pyrite. It's exactly the same for 25-man, except you're going to need 3 bikes to pick up 3 people and take them back to their marked demolisher. So you should know ahead of time that the star demolisher is your player A, your triangle demolisher is player B, and the star demolisher is player C. At which point, when the shutdown finishes, you want all 3 or 1 in 10-man, whichever difficulty you're doing, loaded into the catapult. Your new passengers jump in, and then you fire them up, and the game continues. The reason it's important to wait until the shutdown finishes is because remember what I said. If the passenger during shutdown loads himself into the catapult, you can't fire pyrite. It's important, especially during shutdown, to be doing as much damage on the boss as possible because he's going to be stunned and take 50% extra damage. Now, what the siege engine should be doing is interrupting flame vents with the electroshock, and it's super important to get this done if it coincides with when a shutdown's happening, because the flame vents will continue on, or they should continue on. So you want it interrupted so the 3 people that get dropped down or the 1 person that gets dropped back down and picked up by their bikes don't instantly start getting AoE'd by flame vents. You ideally also want your siege engines to be tanking the adds that spawn on hard mode. So the flowers that spawn throughout the encounter, you're going to want to get aggro on. Now the gunners in this siege engine are the perfect people to do this. So they can fire cannon onto all of the flowers to bring them to where the boss is, and they'll die indirectly from the demolisher attacks and even the siege engine's attacks. The passengers of the siege engine should be using the shield when they're taking heavy damage from the adds, the fire, or even the boss himself. But if you're doing this right, the boss should never actually reach a fixate target because you're always keeping him slow with tar from the bikes, and the shutdown is resetting his speed buff. The gunner on the siege engine, should you have time, should absolutely also be shooting down the flying pyrite in the air. So the pyrite is the most important thing of this fight for the demolisher to be able to keep his damage up. So any passenger in a demolisher or a siege engine should be shooting down pyrite throughout the entire fight while also dealing with their own personal responsibilities. In terms of responsibilities, the last vehicle to talk about is the chopper. Now the chopper's got tar, which you're going to use to slow the boss, but you can also use tar to slow the adds, and then the other vehicles can fire their cannons at it to light the tar up, which is going to give extra damage. Knowing when a shutdown is about to finish, so when the turrets on the boss are all about to die, so you can get over to the boss and pick up your player that you're already assigned to picking up. And remember, you also have first aid kit, so if that player that you've picked up is low for any reason, or even on 50% health, it doesn't matter, you can use first aid kit once a minute to heal that player to full. Now, assuming no changes, as a bike, you should not be able to grab pyrite in the current state. In a pre-nerf state, you can't pick pyrite up for some reason. If you're watching this video post-nerf, one more minor responsibility of the chopper would be to bring pyrite closer to the demolishers if you've got nothing else to do. Now, the difference that the towers add, quite honestly, that is basically the strategy on 10 and 25 man. You know how to do the shutdowns, you know what each responsibility there is for each of the vehicles. Let me just tell you what the hard mode towers actually do, tell you what abilities they add, and how you're going to bring all of this together. So the Tower of Life, which is Freya's ward, reduces the amount of damage Flame Leviathan takes from fire damage, which is pretty much one of our primary sources of damage on him, as well as periodically spawning plants from the corners of the arena that will attack player vehicles. Tower of Flames, which is Mimiron's Inferno, so this ability boosts Flame Leviathan's fire damage dealt by 50%, as well as causing meteors to periodically fall from the sky in a set path. Tower of Frost, or Hodyr's Fury, this ability causes white markers to follow players, occasionally stopping and calling down a frost meteor, dealing heavy damage and freezing them until they're thawed out with a fire attack from one of the other siege vehicles. Tower of Storms, which is Thorim's Hammer, this ability boosts Flame Leviathan's physical damage, as well as causing beams of light to appear and deal massive damage to anyone underneath them. Each tower you leave up also increases the boss's health by 40% per tower, which does stack, so this can actually end up nearly quadrupling his health. So now how all of this comes together, you're going to want the person that's fixated to kite the boss away from everybody. Before you start the fight, you want to use your siege engine gunners and demolisher gunners to be shooting down as much pyrite so the room's flooded with it before you even start. Then you want your demolishers in set areas of the room. Yes, they may need to kite if they get fixated, but ideally you don't want to all be fighting for the same stacks of pyrite, so you want to be spread out and you have your own little areas where your gunner's in charge of bringing pyrite down and directing you to it if needs be. The bikes should be running in front of the boss and dropping tar. They should also be looking out for adds that spawn, dropping tar, and then calling for it to be lit up by your demolishers or siege engines. The salvage demolisher is the primary source of damage, keeping 10 stacks of pyrite on the boss at all times. So having the highest item level players in the Demolishers and the Siege Engines is relatively important as well, but the Demolishers, absolutely. You want your highest item level players in there, because the higher the item level, the better the vehicle scale. So the more damage they'll do and the more health they have. So as a Demolisher, no matter what's going on in the fight, even if you're kiting, you do not want those stacks to drop ever. Siege Engines that are not kiting, just wanted to put that in there, if you're kiting the boss, don't turn around and interrupt. The Siege Engines that are not kiting, that are just dealing with ads or running behind the boss, just smacking him, be sure to make sure you electroshock flame vents as soon as physically possible. And Demolishers, make sure you're communicating with the people that are in your vehicle, telling them when to load up, when to jump out of the bike after the bike's been and picked them up after a shutdown, so you don't lose damage. You know, you don't want your pyrite stacks to drop off because your passenger decided to load himself up early. You call the shots. You tell your passenger, load yourself up. Bike, bring my new passenger. You need to time it so the stacks don't drop. Trust me, if your pyrite stacks drop once during this fight off of any of your Demolishers, you're probably going to struggle with hard mode. So the Tower of Life will bring adds into the fight, which are just small little plants and big plants that run around everywhere. So you want your Siege Engine gunner pulling them into your Siege Engine and everybody else just killing them on the way. Having your bike put tar down in front of them and then having it lit up is a great source of damage. The Tower of Flames that cause a meteor to fall from the sky, it's easily avoidable. You'll see a big red beam and then you'll see a big red fire on the floor. Don't stand in it. The same goes for the Tower of Frost. You'll have a beam of light that's just following you constantly. You just want to keep moving while it's moving and don't get frozen. If you do get frozen, call for somebody to fire you out of it with like a fire cannon shot. And the same with the Tower of Storms, which is just another beam that appears. It has a small delay and then it does heavy damage to everyone caught in the beam. So just do not be stood in it. And that's it. Don't fail your shutdowns. Make sure the people in the Demolishers are rotating properly and constantly getting up there, shutting it down. You should spend a lot of time in shutdown, you know, with the boss actually shut down on 10 and 25 man. You'll only have probably 20-30 seconds tops between shutdown phases, which is why dealing with the ads and positioning is the most important part. Make sure your bikes are picking them up. Make sure your Siege Engines are interrupting, and you've got it. It'll be an easy kill. But as I say, I wouldn't recommend anyone doing it with 0 towers. It's not the way to learn the fight. Go straight in and do it with 2. Do it with 2 and do shutdowns. And then you'll more or less feel quite comfortable with the fight ready for doing 4 towers. The 2 I'd recommend doing it with is actually leaving up Tower of Frost and the Tower of Life. And you're probably like, but they sound like the harder ones. They are, but the boss's health is so far reduced that you're going to get a taste of what the hardest difficulty feels like, but with the boss's health massively reduced, so you can kill it in a lot quicker time. So I'd leave those 2 up just for good practice. But I hope you enjoyed the video. If you did, like and subscribe, because I'm doing fairly comprehensive guides on all of the bosses in Ulduar. And if you're like, why should I listen to you? I've killed all of these bosses on normal and hard mode hundreds and hundreds of times. Like, seriously, on multiple private servers, and obviously I spent every minute of the day on PTR, so I know all of these bosses pretty much inside out. So thanks for watching. Bye.